Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight we drift across a mirror of water that once cradled an entire city. The wind's soft, barely more than a whisper, and mist hangs low over the surface like a dream that hasn't fully settled in. You're gliding in a slender wooden canoe through an eerie calm, a lake that breathes where islands float and gardens bob gently with the rhythm of the waves. The sky is a smudge of purple and ash. You squint, and just ahead, a shadowed figure bends over rows of vibrant green mud up to their knees, fingers stained from planting young maize. This isn't your average backyard tomato patch. This is Tenochtitlan, circa the late 1400s, and you've just paddled into the Aztec Empire's floating Eden. And honestly, you probably won't survive this. The air is humid enough to drown your lungs. The mosquitoes have been training for this moment all year, and that odd noise behind you might be a crocodile or just a goose with rage issues. Either way, stay very still. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake, drop your location and the time you're listening in the comments. It's always wild to see who's farming history with me from halfway across the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel your canoe scrape gently against a bank of reeds. Not solid ground exactly, more like cooperative mud. This is Chinampa country, the ancient solution to a very specific and swampy problem. You've entered a city built in the middle of Lake Texcoco, and the Aztecs needed farmland, lots of it. But instead of draining the lake, they made the lake work for them. Chinampas, those famous floating gardens, aren't technically floating. They're man-made islands anchored with stakes and roots layered like a botanical tiramisu. You step out carefully onto one. It sinks slightly under your weight, but holds firm. Around you, rows of amaranth and beans sway in the breeze. A gardener already sweating through their tunic nods at you and continues weeding. They work barefoot, moving with quiet efficiency, as if the plants expect punctuality. The first thing you notice is how green everything is. Jungle green, pond green, toothpaste commercial green. It's like the whole place has been color graded by a very enthusiastic intern. And that smell, damp earth, crushed cilantro, and something slightly fishy. Not unpleasant, just oddly invigorating. In the distance you hear the soft swish of a paddle, and a woman glides past on a canoe stacked with squash blossoms. She doesn't stop. No one does. The farmers here operate on sun time. When it rises, you're in the field. When it sets, you're still in the field, just squinting a little harder. Tenochtitlan itself rises just beyond these islands. A geometric marvel of canals, temples, and bridges. The city is often described by odd European chroniclers as a kind of watery Venice, but with more obsidian and fewer gondoliers singing badly. It floats above the lake, but its heart pulses here in the Chinampas, where crops grow year-round with a stubborn defiance of drought, flood, or Spanish confusion. You crouch beside a pile of freshly pulled herbs. Ipazote, most likely, smells like a mix of mint and mentholated regret. The gardener beside you doesn't speak, but gestures to a woven basket beside them. You reach in, pull out a handful of tiny tomatoes, bright red, shiny, and apparently grown without any pesticides. Miracle Grow or Instagram reels. Historians still argue whether the Chinampa system began with the Aztecs or was borrowed from earlier Mesoamerican cultures like the Xochimilca. Either way, the Aztecs perfected it. They turned squelchy lakebed into an empire feeding machine. Some estimates say the Chinampas produced 7 times the food yield of regular land plots. Not bad for glorified mud pancakes. But you don't just grow food out here. These gardens are sacred ritual. Some of the plots are set aside just for flowers, especially marigolds, which will eventually end up in temples or on altars. You spot a young boy arranging them carefully into bundles. He glances at you, shrugs, and returns to his work with the kind of stoic calm only 12-year-olds forced into spiritual labor can muster. A dragonfly buzzes past your ear and dives into a puddle. Frogs croak somewhere nearby, and the lake's surface shimmers in the morning light. You hear the hiss of a clay pot boiling something over a fire, a gardener's breakfast maybe. A few yards away, a heron struts like it owns the place. You're starting to wonder if it does. One gardener calls out in Nahuatl, and another tosses them a paddle. It arcs beautifully through the air, narrowly missing your head. These folks are coordinated, and you're not, but you're trying. As you balance awkwardly on the edge of a chinampa, watching the lake city exhale, you start to see the genius of it all. This wasn't just clever engineering, it was an entire worldview. Earth, water, sky, and seed all coexisting in soggy harmony. You dip your hand into the lake. It's cool, almost silky. And somewhere in the murky depths, something with fins brushes past your fingertips. You pull your hand back. Immediately. You're not ready to deal with prehistoric catfish right now. You're kneeling now on the edge of the Chinampa, watching 2 farmers construct a new one just a few yards away. It's a bit like watching a low-tech magic trick in slow motion. They start with a patch of open water and a vague rectangle marked out with sticks and twine. Then, with the patience of saints and the stamina of caffeine, they begin layering. First come the reeds, thick mats of tule and bulrushes bundled together, laid crosswise like an ancient lasagna base. Then the mud. Black, viscous lake-bottom sludge is scooped from nearby canals and dumped on top with wet, meaty slaps. The smell hits you like a memory of every swampy summer you've ever regretted. Still, it's weirdly satisfying. The men pause to stretch their backs. One waves you over, beckoning you to help. You're flattered. Then you realize it's because your boots are clean, and theirs absolutely are not. Still, you roll up your sleeves and give it a go. The mud is heavier than it looks, and halfway through the first scoop, your arm starts negotiating a permanent separation. You drop the bucket. It lands with a splorch. They laugh. Not cruelly, just the way people do when someone clearly doesn't understand how lakes work. You laugh too. It echoes across the water, swallowed quickly by the reeds. Time here feels slow, elastic. You've only been here an hour, maybe 2, but the city behind you already feels like a different planet. The Chinampa continues to take shape. More mud, more reeds, a final topping of dry lake silt. It's like watching a garden bed rise from the underworld. You realize this system is genius, not just because it works, but because it recycles everything. The mud from the canal feeds the crops. The crops feed the people. The waste feeds the mud. It's all connected like compost, but cosmic. Historians still debate exactly how these plots were first stabilized. Some say early Chinampas drifted freely until they were tied to stakes. Others argue that willow saplings were deliberately planted at the corners to anchor them long-term. Either way, it's clear the Aztecs weren't just throwing dirt at the water and hoping for the best. There was method in the muck. Eventually, the frame is ready, rectangular, compact, about as long as a school bus and just wide enough to host a neat grid of vegetables, herbs, and the occasional confused duck. You stare at the still empty surface and imagine the potential squash vines coiling like jungle snakes, beans climbing thin trellises, chili peppers peeking through glossy leaves like little red warnings. And yes, there are tomatoes, real ones. Small, tart, perfect for tossing into someone's soup when they get too cocky. You notice how carefully the rows are measured, how precisely the builders leave spaces between the plantings for water to trickle in and out. There's geometry here. Not the dry chalkboard kind, but the living, breathing, rooted kind. A math of survival, a blueprint for feeding hundreds of thousands of people in a place where farmland didn't exist. One man gestures to the willow poles sticking from each corner of the frame. These, he tells you, are more than anchors. They'll grow into full trees, shading the plot, reinforcing the structure with roots that weave through the mud like veins. They are alive, slowly, stubbornly, silently alive. You glance up at another chinampa nearby and see one already ringed with adult willows, their silver-green leaves dancing in the wind like they're performing for the maize gods. The air smells different now, richer, earthier, a combination of warm algae, blooming flowers, and that special kind of dirt that somehow smells like hope. A dragonfly lands on your arm, vibrates for a second, and then zips away. You're part of the ecosystem now, whether you like it or not. You wipe your hands on your trousers, which was a mistake. The mud now looks permanent, like a tattoo of your incompetence. One of the gardeners notices and hands you a rag woven from agave fibers. You thank him. He nods once, then points to the half-finished chinampa and says something in Nahuatl that probably means don't quit your day job. You laugh again. That's twice now. This place, despite the labor and the muck and the vague threat of amphibians, is weirdly calming. The water muffles everything. Voices sound softer. Even the insects buzz at a polite volume. No horns, no traffic, no phones. Just humans, plants, and water in eternal negotiation. Some historians suggest that the very act of building these chinampas may have held ceremonial weight. After all, if you believe the world floats on water, if your gods walk across reeds and your myths are filled with floods and mud, then constructing a floating garden is almost a reenactment of creation itself. Every plot becomes a miniature world, and you're helping to birth it. You step back into your canoe hands, sore shoes, ruined pride, dented but heart oddly full. The chinampa isn't finished yet, but it will be. The farmers will add more layers tomorrow. Then the planting will begin, and in a few weeks, this patch of lake will be indistinguishable from the others. Just another rectangle of impossibly lush produce, just another miracle. You drift away slowly, paddle dragging in the water like a paintbrush. Behind you, the farmers return to work. The frame floats bobbing gently, already thick with promise. You wake up, or maybe you never fully do, from the rhythmic splash of poles striking water. Another day is beginning in Chinampa country, and the farmers are already up stretching limbs and setting about their ritual choreography. Today, you're on post duty. Not a glamorous assignment, but apparently they trust you with a sharpened stick and vague instructions. What could go wrong? A bundle of young willow stakes sits in the canoe next to you, their ends tapered and splintery, as if daring your palms to toughen up. The task is simple in theory. Drive these stakes deep into the lake bed at the four corners of each new chinampa. In practice, it's like trying to stab a pudding cup with a wet broom handle. You balance precariously on the wobbly edge of a half-built chinampa. The water laps gently at your ankles. One of the elder farmer's skin like weathered bark, eyes sharp as obsidian, hands you a pole. He gestures downward. You plant your feet, raise the stake, and jab it into the water with all the confidence of someone who clearly has no idea what they're doing. It bounces off something mushy. You frown, jab again, a little deeper this time. The farmer chuckles. You suspect he's seen this dance before. Eventually the pole catches. You lean into it using your weight to drive it deeper. There's a sucking sound, a moment of resistance, and then a satisfying shilk as the stake settles into place. 1 down, 3 to go. Your arms already feel like overcooked noodles, but you press on. The willows are more than just anchors. They're the bones of the Chinampa. As they grow, their roots form tight networks that lock the soil in place and help control erosion. And because they're thirsty little trees, they also help manage excess water like living plumbing systems. Some scholars still argue whether willows were chosen purely for utility or if they held ritual significance. Either way, they're indispensable. Your next stake goes in easier. Either you're getting the hang of it, or the lake bed is just being polite. Around you, the water sparkles in the rising sun. Birds call to each other across the reeds. Somewhere nearby, someone sings softly in Nahuatl, the melody floating like incense on the breeze. You take a moment to just stand there. The Chinampa isn't finished yet, but it's getting close. With each stake you drive into the muck, the plot feels more real, more permanent. There's a strange comfort in the repetition. The slap of water, the thud of wood, the brief pause for breath. It's almost meditative. You start to understand how people could do this every day for generations. Then you slip. 1 foot lands squarely in a patch of particularly treacherous mud, and suddenly you're knee-deep in what feels like the digestive tract of an angry pond. The farmer shouts something, not quite laughing, not quite alarmed. You flail, manage to grab a pole, and haul yourself out with the grace of a flopping catfish. Mud in your shoes, mud in your soul. Welcome to Chinampa life. They hand you a gourd of water and clap you on the back like you've been officially baptized. You cough, sputter, and smile anyway. You're earning your stripes one embarrassing tumble at a time. Back at the base of the Chinampa, you help tie the corners with coarse rope made from maguey fiber. The knots are tight, secure. You feel a strange swell of pride. This thing might actually last. Floating farms aren't floating by accident. They're lashed together with deliberate tension and trust in materials that don't come from a hardware store. Historians note how strategic this anchoring method was, not just for keeping the plots in place, but for creating a modular farming system that could expand with population growth. You need more food. Just build another island. Theoretically, it never ends. The lake becomes grid paper, and the farmers are sketching in their plans 1 stake at a time. You glance across the water. Chinampas stretch into the horizon, each a soft rectangle of organized chaos. You can't help but admire the symmetry, so natural it feels accidental, but so precise it couldn't possibly be. Rows of maize beds of herbs, the occasional flower patch like a burst of sunlight on the green canvas. But all of it, every leaf and stalk, depends on these stakes. Without them, nothing holds. It's a reminder, soft but firm, that even in this swampy paradise, structure is everything. By mid-morning, your hands are blistered and your arms ache. But you've helped build something. Not a monument, not a temple, a garden, a place that feeds and heals. You've placed the bones in the ground. The flesh, roots, vines, leaves will come later. Before you leave, the elder farmer pulls you aside. He shows you a small stake, much older, wrapped with faded red cord and marked with carved glyphs. A family stake, passed down through generations. He says it's buried in every Chinampa they own, tying their lives to the land well, the mud across centuries. You nod reverently. You get it now. You climb back into your canoe. Behind you, the Chinampa sways slightly, already beginning to look like it's always been there. You're back on dryish land, or as dry as land gets in the middle of a giant lake bed, and now it's time to get dirty in a different way. Today, you're helping with the magic mix, the sacred stuffing, the Chinampa filling that turns a floating raft of reeds and sticks into something that actually grows food. And spoiler alert, it's not pretty. You're handed a wide, shallow basket, woven from reeds, the kind that feels ancient just to touch. Your job, scoop up lake mud, thick, dark, earthy ooze dredged from the bottom of nearby canals. One of the farmers gestures toward the water. You peer into it and see nothing but swirling murk and maybe the faint shape of a fish watching you, judging silently. You kneel and scoop. The mud is cold, heavier than expected, and clings to your hands like it has abandonment issues. You dump it into the basket and go again. The process is slow, repetitive, and weirdly therapeutic until they add the other ingredients. The farmer next to you produces a bundle of old sacks. From inside comes a collection of substances that definitely don't smell like roses: algae, dead reeds, rotten lake plants, a white paste that looks suspiciously like bird droppings. You raise an eyebrow. He grins and says something that translates roughly to, "This is the good stuff." Historians still argue whether Aztec gardeners deliberately fermented lake muck into fertilizer, or if it just naturally rotted that way. Either way, it worked. You mix the ingredients into the mud with your hands, because apparently gloves are for the weak. The resulting sludge looks like something you'd politely avoid in a parking lot, but smells strangely sweet after a while, like compost with opinions. Now comes the spreading. You follow a woman across the Chinampa, scattering the sludge in even layers between rows marked with sticks and string. She does it with grace. You do it like someone trying to write a love letter using mashed potatoes. Still, it gets done. You pause to look around. The soil here isn't just wet, it's alive, full of microscopic drama, teeming with bacteria, worm castings, and whatever nutrients duckweed dreams are made of. The Aztecs knew this. They didn't have microscopes, but they had results. This soil grew corn that scraped the sky. It fed hundreds of thousands. It never rested. One of the gardeners explains how they rest each plot, by letting it lie fallow for short cycles. Not years, just enough to let nature breathe. Then they rotate crops, planting maize one month, beans the next, always feeding and healing the soil as they go. It's not science class. It's common sense passed down foot to foot, hand to mud-streaked hand. You learn that each Chinampa has its own personality. Some are drier and prefer chili peppers. Others flood easily and love amaranth. Some are more flower-friendly. It's like plant astrology, only with more consequences. As you work, a boy jogs past, carrying a bundle of crushed water hyacinths. He adds them to the pile, natural nitrogen boosters, you're told. Then his little sister waddles over with a basket full of eggshells and ash. From where, who knows? From what you don't want to know. All you know is that she dumps it into the compost, like she's done it 100 times, and walks off like a tiny queen. You're starting to see the logic. This isn't just recycling, it's resurrection. Dead things become living things. Waste becomes food. And in this loop, humans are just another ingredient. The most fringe theories even suggest that certain sacred ashes, possibly from burnt offerings or ceremonial fires, were added to the Chinampa soil to give it divine energy. You don't ask too many questions, mostly because someone just handed you a dead fish. Yup, A dead fish, small, very smelly. Apparently they get added too. You mash it into the corner of the plot like a stinky fertilizer crouton. A woman nods in approval. It's not glamorous, but it's sacred. There's something beautiful about trusting a pile of muck to grow dinner. Something primal. You smear another layer between rows of future maize and feel oddly accomplished. You smell terrible, yes, but you're helping shape the very thing that fed a civilization. Later in the day, the farmer invites you to try a tomato grown in one of the older chinampas. You bite in. It's bright, acidic, sweet, like sunshine and dirt had a baby. You nod, mouth full. It's the best tomato you've ever had, and you helped make the dirt it grew from. The sun begins to slide downward, turning the water gold. Your skin is streaked with mud, your hands raw, but your spirit feels a bit shinier. You've taken lake muck and turned it into life. You've made something grow, or at least you've helped set the stage. As the gardeners start gathering tools and calling to each other in soft tones, you realize something. This isn't about one plot, or even one lake. It's about connection to the land, the water, and the ancestors who figured this all out, with zero manuals and a lot of mud under their nails. The wind picks up slightly and the chinampa gently shifts beneath your feet. The water slaps the edges in lazy rhythm like a lullaby only plants truly understand. You close your eyes for a second and everything smells like compost lake breeze and something blooming you can't quite name. You're walking barefoot now, your toes sinking into the soft, damp earth of a well-established chinampa. It squishes beneath you like a friendly sponge pulsing with silent life. You've spent hours hauling mud and mystery fertilizer, but this is where you finally understand why Aztec soil wasn't just good, it was magic. A farmer waves you over and hands you a handful of soil, dark, crumbly, almost velvety. You rub it between your fingers and it's like holding warm cake crumbs. The scent is deep and earthy with a sharp green tang that practically whispers I could grow a tree in a shoebox. The farmer smiles and says something about how good soil should smell like rain and possibility. You nod, pretending you knew that already. You crouch beside a row of young maize plants. Their stalks are still small but stand upright with a kind of leafy optimism. A few feet away, beans begin curling around tiny trellises and squash vines sprawl like lazy sunbathers. It's a trio of survival, the sacred agricultural trifecta, maize, beans, and squash. Planted together, they feed the people and feed each other. Beans fix nitrogen into the soil, squash shades the ground, and maize gives everybody something to climb. It's like a perfectly dysfunctional family that somehow works. Historians point to the astonishing yields of chinampa farming. Some records suggest these plots could be harvested up to 7 times a year. Think about that. While modern farms struggle with once or twice these floating islands, we're dishing out cucumbers and chilies, like overachieving buffet tables. You trail your fingers through a patch of amaranth, its tiny pink blooms catching the light. A farmer nearby tells you the Aztecs called it huachtli, a grain so revered it was used in religious rituals, celebrations, and even taxes. You grin. Tax grain, somehow more tolerable than modern paperwork. A teenage boy plucks a few leaves from a nearby herb bed and crushes them between his fingers. The scent hits you sharp, medicinal, and oddly familiar. Epazote. You're told it keeps the bugs out and the digestion smooth. Practical magic. Aztec gardening wasn't just about feeding the body. It was a whole body, spirit, and stomach kind of operation. As you watch the gardeners work, it hits you when no one is measuring pH levels or fiddling with spreadsheets. They're reading the soil with their senses, smelling it, touching it, watching how water flows and leaves droop. And still they managed to feed a city that rivaled any in Europe at the time. A small group gathers around a chinampa that's just been planted. They kneel, heads bowed, whispering softly in Nahuatl. One of them leaves behind a clay bowl with a flower, a pinch of cornmeal, and a few drops of something that looks suspiciously like blood. You look away politely, pretending you didn't notice. But the meaning is clear. The soil gives life, so they give something back. You sit at the edge of the chinampa legs, dangling over the canal. A frog croaks nearby. The air is thick with heat, but not oppressive. It wraps around you like a weighted blanket. Insects hum in lazy loops and dragonflies dart across the surface like scribbles on water. Then there's the fringe theory. Some scholars believe that the unique microbial composition of the chinampa soil contributed not just to plant health, but to human immunity. Meaning maybe this mud was the Aztec version of a multivitamin. A probiotic bog. Nobody agrees on it, of course. Historians are still debating if it's real science or just wishful composting. But when you dig your fingers into that dirt again, you sort of believe it. There's power here, not flashy lightning bolt power, but quiet persistence. The kind of strength that pushes corn through soil day after day without applause. You catch sight of a woman watering a patch of herbs with a gourd-shaped scoop. She moves slowly, intentionally, her shadow swaying over the plants. Each drop seems placed, not poured. You realize this isn't just gardening, it's choreography. The water flows, the soil drinks, the roots stretch. Everyone has their role and no one rushes. A group of kids passes by, chasing each other with handfuls of wet moss. They're laughing, slipping, tumbling into the water. Their parents don't shout, just smile, shake their heads, and return to weeding. The chinampas aren't just for food, they're for life, growing, splashing, learning, laughing, messy and miraculous. You look around once more, your gaze tracing the grid of islands stretching to the horizon. Each one is a tiny masterpiece, unique yet connected. It's not just that the Aztecs grew food in a swamp. It's that they built an empire from it. And every handful of soil you've touched today, that's the foundation. Your stomach rumbles. Someone hands you a flat cake made from maize and herbs still warm from a clay griddle. You take a bite. It tastes like sunshine, dirt, and maybe a little magic. You lean back on your elbows, watching the clouds roll across the sky, reflected perfectly in the still water between chinampas. There are no fences, no tractors, no endless stretches of monoculture, just floating islands rooted in mud, whispering softly as they grow. The morning mist is lifting now, curling away from the canals like steam off a pot of tamales. The city is waking. And as you squelch your way through another chinampa, you realize that farming here wasn't just about planting food. It was about balancing the cosmos, literally. An older gardener joins you, his face lined with the sort of calm you can't fake. He motions you to stand still. Then silently he points toward the sun rising just above the eastern rim of Lake Texcoco. You follow his gaze. The maize stalks are already leaning toward the light, as if bowing in gratitude. He mutters a phrase in Nahuatl, something you don't catch fully, but you recognize the tone: reverence. In Aztec belief, agriculture wasn't a job. It was a sacred duty. Every corn kernel planted was a reenactment of the gods' own sacrifices. According to their mythology, the gods bled themselves into the earth to give human sustenance. So every time you dig a furrow, scatter seeds, or whisper a prayer to the maize, you're feeding that divine cycle. No pressure or anything. You trail behind the gardener as he checks the alignment of the planting rows. He doesn't use a compass or ruler, he uses the shadows. The sun tells him everything. You realize you're witnessing a quiet calibration between man, earth, and sky. Nearby, another gardener kneels beside a row of tiny squash plants. She hums softly, checking the leaves for pests and gently pressing the soil around their roots. You'd swear she's talking to them. You're not imagining it. Aztec farmers were known to murmur to their crops, offering gentle encouragement or warnings. It sounds odd until you remember modern folks whisper to houseplants. Maybe the Aztecs were just ahead of the curve. You spot a clay figurine perched beside one of the garden rows, a small idol of Tenochti, the maize god, his face serene and strangely potato-shaped. A few kernels and a splash of pulque fermented agave sit at his feet, an offering. You're told that no major planting began without this. To skip the ritual was to tempt cosmic imbalance, and no one wanted that, especially not the corn. Historians still argue how widespread or formal these rituals were. Were they community-wide affairs led by priests or intimate gestures between farmers and their fields? The evidence is mixed, but what's clear is this agriculture was not secular. Every stalk of corn was both food and faith. You follow the farmer to a small plot set slightly apart. It's fallow now, the soil resting, but at the center is a tiny stone circle, an altar maybe, or just a marker. He gestures for you to place your hand on the soil. You do. It's warm, not sun-warmed, alive warm. It radiates like something breathing under there. He smiles, then walks away. No explanation needed. Your next task is to help with the crop rotation, which sounds fancy until you realize it means moving compost buckets and deciphering which plants go where. There's a rhythm to it. Corn grows tall and fast so it gets the sun. Beans use its stalks like poles, wrapping around them like clingy friends. Squash sprawls on the ground, shading out weeds and keeping the soil cool. It's not just efficient, it's elegant. Aztec farmers didn't need chemical fertilizers or irrigation pumps. They had chinampa soil crop companionship and a solid understanding of what plants liked and hated. You're told chilies don't get along with beans. Tomatoes are drama queens. Herbs need their own space. It's basically a botanical soap opera. A little girl is planting flowers at the edge of the plot, bright orange marigolds that glow like tiny sunsets. You ask why. Her father explains they attract pollinators, yes, but also they're sacred, used in offerings, festivals, even funerals. You begin to realize that in the chinampas form and function are married. Every plant has two jobs: feed the people and feed the gods. A fringe theory you overhear from another gardener, that certain planting layouts reflected celestial patterns. The Milky Way mirrored in corn rows. The Pleiades echoed in bean hills. Could be coincidence, or maybe the farmers were drawing constellations in the mud, one seed at a time. You stand at the edge of the chinampa, watching a canoe drift by its rider, humming an old tune. In the back, there's a pile of maize squash and something purple you can't name. They're headed to market, you assume, or maybe to a temple. Suddenly the wind picks up and the maize rustles in waves. The sound is soft, like a whisper, but not human. It's the voice of the field. The voice of something older than this city, older than boats and tools and calendars. The sound of the world being balanced by dirt, by sweat, and by a faith that farming is more than survival. You close your eyes and listen. The sky's brightening into that kind of blue you only get in high-altitude valleys, crisp, almost too clean, like someone turned up the contrast on the whole world. You're standing on the edge of a narrow canal that runs like a silver ribbon between two chinampas. It's quiet here, too quiet, which usually means trouble. Or tadpoles. You crouch, peer into the water, and spot them tiny flicks of motion, translucent tails wiggling in clusters. The gardener next to you nods and mutters something about early harvest indicators. You think he's joking. He's not. In this world, even the tadpoles matter. They're part of a delicate ecological chorus that sings whether the fields are healthy or not. Aztec gardeners were more than planters, they were observers, constantly watching how frog populations, duckweed blooms, and dragonfly swarms shifted with the seasons. A bloom of duckweed might mean your canal is getting too nutrient-rich, or it might just mean it's duckweed's time to shine. You step onto a nearby chinampa where a cluster of children are helping an elder farmer clear out overgrowth. Their small hands toss bundles of water hyacinths and duckweed onto the bank like it's a game. One of them shows you a glassy beetle the size of your thumbnail and announces proudly that it's a lucky one. You don't ask why. You just nod like you believe it. The plants growing here aren't glamorous. There's no golden maize or fiery chilies. Just low creeping herbs and stubby greens you can't identify. This is a micro-crop patch, a test bed where farmers grow small samples to see what thrives and what sulks. You pinch a leaf and rub it between your fingers. Smells like mint and something else, possibly despair. It's pungent but probably great in soup. A fringe theory you hear in passing. Some of these lesser-known greens may have had medicinal uses lost to time. A few modern botanists believe the Aztecs were cultivating plants not just for flavor, but for mental clarity, digestion, even spiritual visions. Historians still debate whether some chinampas doubled as experimental gardens or sacred pharmacies. Further down the row, you come across a little wooden platform, a kind of floating compost island tethered to the main chinampa by reed ropes. On it are baskets of crushed eggshells, shredded corn husks, fish bones, and something that looks suspiciously like fermented cactus juice. A woman stirs the pile with a long stick while humming a tune that sounds like a lullaby. You don't ask what it's for, you already know. Everything in this place has a purpose, even sludge. The sun climbs higher. You take shelter under a small willow tree growing at the edge of the chinampa. Its roots spill into the water, gnarled and snake-like, holding the soil in a gentle grip. A heron lands nearby, gives you a sidelong glance, and then proceeds to stalk something invisible in the reeds. You feel oddly honored by its brief tolerance. And then, of course, you step on someone's tadpoles. Just a few. You didn't mean to, but the splash draws attention, and the farmer rushes over. He crouches beside the disturbed patch of water, scans it, and sighs dramatically. You brace for a scolding. Instead, he picks up a chunk of moist soil and smears it on your forearm, a gesture apparently of mild rebuke and comedic solidarity. You're part of the ecosystem now, mud tattoos and all. The children laugh. One starts chanting something that probably translates to clumsy foreigner ruins everything. You bow theatrically and accept your new role. Someone hands you a reed scoop and directs you toward a mini channel clogged with duckweed. You get to work clearing it like a pond janitor with no retirement plan. Duckweed, you learn, is both blessing and curse. It helps oxygenate the water and suppress algae, but too much of it and it smothers everything. The gardeners scoop it up in baskets, dry it, and sometimes even add it to compost or feed. You never thought you'd develop opinions about pond scum, but here we are. A little while later, you're invited to sit with the gardeners for a quick lunch. Tamales wrapped in banana leaves, fresh herbs, and a cloudy drink made from fermented maize. It's earthy and sour, but cooling. You ask what it's called. The answer translates roughly to strength for your sweat. You nod and sip. It tastes like work and satisfaction. You overhear a debate between two elder farmers about whether the frogs have been louder this year. One says yes, it's a good sign. The other says they're just old and everything seems louder. Historians still argue whether these animal cues were actually tracked systematically or just part of oral lore passed down with a wink and a shrug. You lean back against the willow, your fingers still stained from muck, and watch the canal shimmer in the heat. The heron is gone now, replaced by a line of water striders dancing across the surface like tiny ice skaters. You wonder if they're watching you too. If they're waiting for you to make another wrong step, you probably will. But they don't seem too worried. You exhale. The tadpoles survive, the duckweed thins, and the chinampa breathes on. You're stirring a basket of maize seeds when an elderly farmer sidles up beside you and says with a perfectly straight face, "The corn listens." You stop stirring. He nods slowly as if to confirm that yes, you heard him correctly. Then he picks up a handful of seeds and holds them up to the light, inspecting them like they're tiny ancient scrolls. "Speak kindly to it," he says, "if you want it to grow straight." You glance at the seeds, which say nothing, yet somehow you feel like they're judging you. The farmer isn't joking. Here in the Chinampas, there's a quiet belief, half tradition, half conviction, that the plants respond not just to water and sun, but to tone, intent, and mood. Aztec farmers were in a very literal sense plant whisperers. The act of planting was a dialogue, not a transaction. As you trail him through rows of knee-high maize, you see what he means. The gardeners here move slowly, speaking in low voices, sometimes singing softly under their breath. There's rhythm in everything, how they sow, how they harvest, how they walk between rows as if not to disturb the plant's dreams. You follow their lead, tiptoeing like the corn is meditating. The maize itself stands proud and tall, blades slicing the air like green machetes. You reach out and feel the smooth, cool surface of a stalk. It sways slightly under your touch, as if acknowledging you. Sentiotl, the maize god, isn't just some statue tucked in a temple. He's here breathing in the dew, stretching in the heat, and listening. That's the feeling you get anyway. It's not creepy, more like comforting. The sense that this field has memory, that it remembers every hand that ever touched it, every prayer ever murmured into its rows. You pass a patch where the maize grows unusually crooked, bent in on itself like it's whispering secrets to the soil. Your guide frowns. "Bad planting day," he mutters. "Too much arguing." Historians still debate whether these kinds of beliefs were widespread practice or symbolic metaphors passed down through oral tradition. Some claim this plant personality idea was rooted in agricultural superstition. Others argue it reflected a deeper Mesoamerican worldview where every living thing from the jaguar to the jalapeno had a spirit. Whatever the case today, you're taking no chances. You apologize to the corn, just in case. Further ahead, a small ceremony is underway. A bowl of pulque sits at the base of a maize stalk, flanked by marigolds and a burned bundle of copal resin. A woman kneels in front of it, whispering something while slowly pressing soil around the roots. She's blessing the planting. A quiet act. No trumpet, no flare, just soft words and steady hands. You kneel beside her and mimic the gesture. Your fingers press into the soil, warm and yielding. You don't know the words, but something inside you settles anyway. Nearby, a young man plays a flute carved from bone. The melody is gentle meandering like a stream finding its path. It's not performance, it's presence. a way to be in harmony with the act of growing. You wonder what your houseplants would say if they had this kind of attention. Then comes the pest check. You're handed a piece of obsidian, sharp, shiny, intimidating, and tasked with gently trimming any diseased leaves. You manage to not slice your fingers, though the plants are not entirely cooperative. One stalk seems to lean into your arm as you snip like it's testing your commitment. By midday, the heat turns everything into a warm blur. The maize whispers in the breeze. A heron glides overhead. A child runs past chasing a butterfly, shrieking with laughter. A woman pauses her weeding to watch the clouds. There's no rush. The work matters, but so does the stillness between each step. One gardener tells you about how during times of drought, they would sing to the corn, not out of desperation, but out of respect. A reminder that the maize is family, that it has ears in more ways than one. There's even a fringe theory you overhear during lunch that certain vocal frequencies, perhaps those of traditional Nahuatl chants, could help stimulate growth. Is it science? Is it symbolic? Historians shrug. The corn, however, seems unconcerned either way. It grows slow and stubborn and sublime. You close the day by helping gather maize tassels into bundles. The scent is grassy and sweet with hints of smoke from nearby cook fires. Your hands are blistered, your shoulders sore, but your heart feels oddly at ease, like you've said what needed to be said and the field has nodded back. As you walk back to the canoe, you look over your shoulder at the rows of maize standing tall against the lake horizon. They don't wave goodbye, they just sway, quiet, steady, listening. You arrive at the bustling heart of the city just as the morning haze gives way to full sun, and it's like stepping out of a poem and straight into a festival Tlatelolco market day. Your canoe glides into one of the many watery side entrances, paddled by a teenage boy who insists on racing passing canoes while yelling something about the fastest squash in the lake. You cling to the edge and pray that nothing valuable or edible goes overboard. You dock near a reed-woven platform packed with vendors' baskets and enough vegetables to launch a reality show called Produce Wars Aztec Edition. The air smells like chilly wet earth and smoked fish. It is glorious. You step onto the floating market and immediately get jostled by a man balancing a tower of maize on his head. Another is carrying a full basket of tomatoes in each hand, and neither is spilling a single one. You, on the other hand, immediately bump into a stand of dried herbs, knocking a few bundles into the canal. A child retrieves them with a stick, looks at you solemnly, and whispers, "It's okay. We all fall in the water eventually." Vendors are everywhere, women sitting cross-legged on mats, calling out prices and praises of their goods, men slicing cactus paddles into neat stacks, teenage apprentices weighing squash blossoms with smooth stones. The vibe is equal parts flea market, farmer's market, and spiritual bazaar. And nearly all of it, nearly every fruit stalk, leaf, and bundle of fragrant greens, comes from the Chinampas. You follow a woman selling amaranth cakes shaped like tiny pyramids. She explains they're made with honey and a little blood from ceremonial offerings. You smile and nod, hoping it's metaphorical blood. It's probably not. You buy one anyway. It's delicious. Slightly nutty, lightly sweet, and surprisingly filling. Historians often note that Tlatelolco was one of the largest and most complex markets in the pre-Columbian world. Some estimates suggest over 40,000 people pass through it daily. To put that in perspective, that's like a Beyoncé concert happening every morning, minus the smoke machines, but plus a lot more chilies. As you walk, you see not just produce, but trade in action. Fish caught in Lake Texcoco are swapped for salt cakes from the coast. Avocados are bartered for obsidian blades. Beans are exchanged for cloth baskets or even live ducks, who quack resentfully as they're bundled under arms like angry pillows. One vendor has laid out nothing but different types of maize, red, blue, yellow, black, and waxy samples of ground cornmeal beside each one. You taste one spoonful and are hit with a buttery mineral depth that makes you question everything you know about tortillas. You pass a stall where a woman is arranging squash blossoms in delicate spirals on woven mats. She's not selling them as food. These are for temples, for offerings. She speaks softly to each blossom as she sets it down, a gesture of respect, not routine. You're reminded again that in this world, the sacred and the everyday are stitched together with corn silk and flower stems. Then you hear it, the sound of a deal being made. Loud, expressive, and filled with gentle mockery. Two older women are haggling over a bag of chili peppers. One insists they're too spicy, the other claims they're not spicy enough for her soup. A third jumps in to suggest a compromise they both buy and taste them together at her food stand. Somehow this ends with all three laughing and handing over cacao beans, the standard currency of the market. Yes, cacao beans. You're told this over a lunch of bean-filled tamales. Aztec currency was edible, highly coveted, and yes, sometimes a little nibbled on in emergencies. One farmer even jokes that it's hard to save money when your wallet smells like hot chocolate. There's a fringe theory among scholars that some Chinampa farmers cultivated specific varieties of cacao not for their own use, but purely for trade. Since cacao couldn't grow in the highland lakes, it came up through long-distance barter, but the idea that farmers shaped their harvests to anticipate economic tides, that's not just farming, that's agricultural chess. You watch as a group of canal traders unload goods from larger canoes, bundles of herbs, smoked fish, dyed textiles. Their chinampas are farther out on the edge of the city, beyond where tourists paddle and closer to the raw lake. They come into market like ships into harbor, floating cargo holds piled high with the bounty of living mud. A woman hands you a drink, atole, hot and thick, made with cornmeal and flavored with vanilla. She doesn't charge you, just pats your muddy shirt and says, "You're one of us now." You don't argue, you just sip and smile. As the sun shifts overhead, the market seems to shimmer. Colors blaze from woven mats. Voices rise in harmony, not chaos. The smell of cooked maize, wet wood, and crushed herbs wraps around you like a warm blanket. This isn't just a place to shop. It's a living bridge between Chinampa and city water and land, labor, and ceremony. And somehow, in all its motion, it feels restful. Like everything is happening exactly as it should. You sit for a moment on the edge of the dock, feet dangling above the canal, and watch a canoe disappear into the reeds loaded with squash hope and maybe a few beans destined to become currency. You think to yourself, if this is a market, it's the quietest miracle you've ever seen. You wake to the sound of water slapping gently against stone, not quite the slap of open lake, but a more purposeful rhythm, defensive even. You're standing now at the edge of one of the canals that snakes between Chinampas and the city's core, and as you look around you realize something that hadn't quite clicked before. This whole farming system is also a fortress. The gardeners weren't just growing tomatoes, they were creating a moat. The city of Tenochtitlan sat smack in the middle of Lake Texcoco, and the Chinampas radiated outward like ribs from a spine. Between them ran miles of narrow canals, all carefully designed not just for irrigation and transport, but as a protective web. Any invading force would have to paddle slog or swim their way through a plant-filled labyrinth before they ever saw a single step of the city's causeways. You peer into the murky water, imagining Spanish conquistadors in their sweaty armor trying to figure out where they even are, and you kind of smile. It's hard to swing a sword when you're stuck in mud dodging floating squash. The gardener beside you, a wiry man with a paddle slung across his back, points out something you hadn't noticed. The chinampas themselves aren't all the same. Some are intentionally spaced farther apart. Others form zigzags or dense clusters. It's not random, it's tactical. You nod slowly. Someone thought this through. He leads you down a narrow path flanked by high-growing maize and flowering bushes, which suddenly opens up into a broader canal, a sort of watery boulevard. A canoe is approaching, loaded not with vegetables but with reed barriers, woven panels designed to be quickly dropped into the water to block canal routes. He explains that during wartime, these were hauled up, lashed together, and turned into floating blockades. Historians still argue whether the Chinampa system was built with defense in mind from the beginning or simply adapted for it as the empire grew. Either way, it worked. When the Spanish arrived, they were stunned by a city they couldn't charge into. No walls to breach, just water. Water, mud, and thousands of farmers who knew every inch of it. You hear the distant clack of obsidian on obsidian. Nearby, two young men are sparring not with swords but with long farming poles. One jabs, the other dodges, and then they both laugh like they're playing tag. But their footwork precise, balanced. This is more than play. It's training. You remember hearing how even gardeners were expected to defend their chinampas when needed. The tools of peace paddles, digging sticks, planting blades could be weapons in a pinch, and everyone knew the terrain. It wasn't just their home, it was their advantage. Your guide points out one last feature, a narrow canal forked in 3 directions. He throws a small stick into one path. The current pulls it gently left. Another stick is tossed right. Nothing. Still water. A hidden sluice gate. These weren't just farming ditches. They were water control systems capable of rerouting traffic or trapping it. There's even a fringe theory that certain Chinampa clusters had ceremonial or sacred significance that doubled as natural checkpoints, places where farmers and priests alike could keep watch under the guise of tending the maize. Again, no concrete proof, but if anyone could turn a garden into a trap, it was the Aztecs. You find yourself stepping more carefully now, aware that beneath the green this is still a city on alert. Even the willows seem to stand a little taller, like sentinels in leafy armor. Back in your canoe, you float past a series of stone walkways, known as calzadas, elevated causeways, that connect the island city to the mainland. These, you're told, had removable wooden bridges. In case of attack, the bridges came up and the city became an island again, surrounded by allies with pointy sticks and killer chili sauce. And yet, despite this defensive genius, the Chinampas remain gentle, beautiful. Their curves are soft. Their crops are lush. It's like walking through a weapon that has no interest in hurting you unless you try to hurt it first. You pause near a particularly thick cluster of chinampas where no canals are visible from above, hidden by trees. Your guide calls it El Nido, the nest, a place where refugees could hide, where boats could vanish, where supply lines could remain intact even under siege. There are children laughing in the distance, unaware that their playground used to be a shield. The sun hits the water just right, and the reflection blinds you for a second. You squint and see a flock of birds. Egrets may be rising from the maze in a sudden cloud of white. You wonder how many invaders ever saw that and thought easy target, and how many learned too late what it meant to wage war against a floating garden. You return your gaze to the city far across the lake. It gleams, stone and whitewashed pyramids rising like teeth from the green. You breathe in. You feel it now, not just the agriculture, not just the ecosystem, but the intention. This was design, this was philosophy, and if needed, this was defense. The sun is barely cresting the distant ridge when you join the gardeners for a full day's work. Today there are no grand ceremonies or dramatic canal chases. Today is about routine, the slow, repetitive, sacred rhythm of surviving one squash at a time. You follow a woman named Yesenia. She's somewhere between 50 and forever wrapped in a woven shawl, her feet bare, her voice always just on the edge of a laugh. You try to keep up with her pace, but she walks with the silent intensity of someone who could outpace a jaguar while carrying a basket of chilies on her head. You begin with water collection. At the break of dawn, the canals are mirror flat and still cool from the night. Yesenia dips a gourd into the water, tests it with her nose because apparently that's a thing, and nods. Good today, she says. No stink. You're assigned a pole and a shallow reed bucket. Your job is to scoop water from one canal and trickle it carefully between planting rows. It's not irrigation by flood, it's irrigation by whisper. A single splash out of place earns you a look from Yesenia that could shrivel a zucchini. By mid-morning, it's compost turning time. You shovel fermented lake muck mixed with last month's corn husks and yesterday's fish heads. It smells like success, if success had a sense of humor and a strong aftertaste. As you turn the pile, you notice small beetles, earthworms, and something translucent with far too many legs. You scream a little, quietly. Yesenia smirks. There's no break. There is, however, breakfast. She pulls tamales from a clay pot warmed by embers stuffed with squash flowers and herbs, grown just meters away. You sit on a log. She doesn't say much, just hands you one and drinks from a clay cup of maize drink eyes on the field. Later, you're directed to weed the corn rows, and this somehow is the most terrifying task of the day. The maize is tall now, shoulder height, and moving through it feels like walking through a crowd that doesn't want you there. You kneel to pull creeping vines and rebellious grasses. For a moment, it's peaceful. Then you hear a low hum. Something buzzes past your head, then another. You turn your head slowly and realize you are not alone. The mosquitoes are here, and they have found you delicious. You slap your arm. Miss. Slap again. Miss again. Yesenia walks by, calmly waving a bundle of smoking herbs like a living citronella candle. They like city blood, she says. You don't know whether to be flattered or afraid. You spend the next hour trailing her, hiding in the herbal smoke cloud like a sneaky duckling. There's family drama, too. One field over, a man is loudly arguing with his teenage son about whether the beans are too tightly planted. The son gestures wildly. The father waves a hoe in the air. A neighbor mutters that they've been fighting about that for a week. You learn that even in paradise, generational disagreements thrive. And yet between all this, the garden grows. Yesenia takes you on a walk through the smaller chinampa plots. These are test beds, herb gardens, or places where flowers are grown for ritual use. She touches each plant, gently muttering its name like an old friend. Zompantli epizot uauzontle tlapatl. At one point she stops and crouches beside a lone tomato vine. It's not doing well. She plucks a yellowing leaf, sniffs the stem, frowns. She digs her fingers into the soil, stirs it, then stands. Too much water, she says, like a doctor diagnosing a patient. She doesn't ask how it happened. She just moves on to the next plant. Historians still argue whether daily tasks like these were just dictated by formal calendars or simply guided by intuition and ancestral wisdom. Some say farmers worked by celestial signs. Others say they just knew. Watching Yesenia, you're inclined to believe both. She consults the sky like a weather app and the soil like a diary. Lunch is quieter. She shares blue corn tortillas with beans and squash. You eat beside the water where ducks drift lazily and small fish ripple the surface. A canoe passes by loaded with sunflowers and a boy singing to himself. It feels like a dream, a long, muddy, mosquito-filled dream. By afternoon, it's maintenance time. You help reinforce a canal wall with fresh reeds, patting the mud in like cake frosting. It's oddly satisfying. Then Yesenia hands you a paddle. It's time to check the trap nets for fish. You're thrilled until you realize the fish are alive and very slippery. You catch 2, lose 5, and splash yourself thoroughly. Yesenia claps. As the sun begins to dip, you help stack bundles of dried amaranth for tomorrow's market trip. Your back aches, your hands are stained green, and your hair smells like compost. But you've done it. You've lived a full Chinampa day, not a simulation. The real deal. You sit at the edge of the Chinampa, watching the sky soften into shades of mango and magenta. Yesenia hums a song, no words, just a slow, steady tune that settles in your bones like warm tea. She looks at you and says, "Now you understand. This is our office, our temple, our kitchen, our story." You nod. And you do. The sun is high now, casting sharp shadows on the water as you glide silently past rows of maize and amaranth, bound for somewhere you probably shouldn't be going, the Emperor's Garden. Your guide, a younger gardener with a mischievous streak and a paddle he calls lightning, has agreed to sneak you into the edges of Montezuma's Royal Botanical Reserve. You were told to keep your head down and don't smell anything too loudly. This is going well. The garden itself sits on a Chinampa cluster, unlike anything you've seen. These plots are curated, not cultivated, landscaped into precise symmetrical beds with exotic flowers that shimmer in impossible colors. Vines drape over carved stone pillars. Orchids bloom next to ferns. Water trickles from unseen springs. It feels less like a farm and more like Eden, but with tighter security. You pass under an arch of woven reeds and enter what could only be called a floral cathedral. The scent hits first citrus, vanilla, wet leaves, and something sharp you can't identify. Every flower here seems to have its own PR campaign. You're surrounded by blossoms the size of your face and vines that curl like they're listening to your thoughts. This is not the place for corn and beans. This is where the Aztecs collected the rare, the medicinal, and the mystical. You spot cacao saplings, small and delicate, tobacco plants, pungent and coiled, even tiny pepper trees, their leaves trembling like they're nervous to be here. According to historical accounts, Montezuma maintained extensive gardens, both inside the capital and at his palace in Chapultepec. The plants were meticulously catalogued, watered by canal-fed aqueducts, and tended by a rotating group of elite gardeners who were closer to priests than peasants. Your mischievous guide points toward a section enclosed by a low fence made from carved stone serpents. Inside are flowers you've never seen, blue like glacier water petals shaped like teardrops. He leans in and whispers that one cures nightmares, or causes them. Depends who you ask. Historians still debate whether these gardens served more as pharmaceutical laboratories, luxury displays, or spiritual sanctuaries. The answer is probably yes to all three. You can practically hear the debate echoing off the petals. You walk softly, as if the flowers could get offended. In a tucked-away corner you find a set of raised beds, filled with nothing but moss, carefully misted, and flanked by smooth river stones. You've never seen such reverence for ground fuzz, but here it glows like it knows secrets. A small shrine sits at the far end of the garden, almost camouflaged by the greenery. It's a stone basin filled with water and floating marigold petals. On its edge is a carved figurine of Xochipilli, the god of flowers, dance, and pleasure. Someone's left fresh cacao beans as an offering. You fight the urge to touch them. You've learned your lesson with ceremonial altars. Then comes a surprise food. A young woman walks out from behind a vine curtain carrying a platter of fruit. You're handed a slice of what appears to be papaya, but sweeter, silkier. It melts in your mouth like morning sunshine. You try to ask where it's from. She just says, "Here." You don't know if that means the Chinampas, the garden, or the empire in general. You decide it doesn't matter. You notice now that there's almost no sound here. No market chatter, no ducks, just the whisper of water and the occasional buzz of a dragonfly bold enough to tour the emperor's personal Eden. Even the breeze seems to behave, rustling the leaves like it's flipping pages in a sacred book. A fringe theory claims that Montezuma's garden was also a political tool, a way to display power through biodiversity. By growing every useful and beautiful plant within the empire's reach, he could quite literally say, "Behold, I command the sun and soil." You can't argue with it. This place makes Versailles look like a well-kept backyard. You reach a tiny plot of lettuce, yes, lettuce growing in delicate rows. It feels strangely humble compared to the rest. You ask your guide why it's here. He shrugs. Sometimes the emperor just wants a salad. And suddenly the floating farms you left behind this morning come back into focus. Because here's the quiet truth. The Chinampas made this possible. The royal garden, the rare herbs, the exotic fruit, they were all built on the backbone of basic produce: tomatoes, maize, squash, beans, grown in muck, hauled by canoe, sold in baskets. The emperor might have dined on pineapple and powdered cacao, but someone planted amaranth in the rain, chased off ducks, and dragged compost at sunrise so that he could have that luxury. There's power in this garden, yes, but the real magic that still belongs to the floating rows of lake-fed earth that make the empire bloom. As you leave, your guide warns you not to speak of this little detour. You pretend to zip your lips. He nods approvingly, then offers you a single marigold from the garden. You tuck it behind your ear. It smells like sunlight and something older than memory. You're halfway through a peaceful paddle back from the emperor's garden when your canoe hits something that definitely isn't a log. You freeze. Your guide freezes. A slow ripple expands outward from the collision point, and then just above the surface you see two amber eyes blink. Then a wide, toothy grin. Crocodile. Okay. Technically, it's more likely an alligator gar, or maybe one of those prehistoric-looking amphibious fish that still haunt Lake Texcoco's waters. But the locals, they just call anything with scales and a bad attitude a swamp lizard. This one is sunning itself on the edge of a half-shaded chinampa and looks like it's considering whether or not you're crunchy. You and your guide back away, slowly paddling in silence until the creature slips under the surface. It disappears like a ghost into the water, gone but not forgotten. You exhale. The guide laughs mostly at your face. "We don't get many big ones now," he says, "but back then Chinampa farmers had to defend their fields against more than weeds." Turns out the floating gardens weren't just a battle against erosion or birds. They were open-air buffets for an entire food chain. Crocodiles, large fish snakes, and the occasional overly confident heron were all part of daily life. Some farmers even carried long, sharpened poles, not just for paddling but for poking back. You visit one such plot half swallowed by reeds, where a few older gardeners are reinforcing the banks. One of them pulls out a small collection of what look like homemade tools, sharpened digging sticks, a notched paddle, and, yep, something that might have once been a fish club. They show you scars. One on a knee from stepping on a stingray, another more dramatic across a hand, courtesy of a snapping turtle. You stare. They grin. Then someone yells, and everyone turns to see a goose. Yes, a goose charging down the canal path like it's defending a sacred temple. The target is a teenage gardener holding a basket of fish heads. He doesn't make it far. The goose wins. "Worst predator on the lake," an old man says. No one disagrees. Later in the day, you help string up simple fencing made from woven reeds and thorny branches. These are low-tech defenses, not just against animals, but also wandering children, loose canoes, and particularly enthusiastic pigs. You start to notice them more low barriers around squash beds, shiny ribbons tied to stakes to scare birds, even floating scarecrows made of gourds with angry faces painted on them. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs actively hunted the more dangerous lake creatures or just coexisted with them through wary avoidance. Evidence exists for both. Some codices show crocodiles being used in ceremonial imagery, possibly as symbols of power or chaos or just really bad neighbors. One fringe theory suggests that certain chinampas were deliberately left unplanted as buffers, sacrificial zones to lure hungry animals away from the more precious crop fields. A sort of early wildlife management program with extra frogs. You help collect duck eggs from a floating nest built into the reeds. Your guide warns you to move slowly. The mother watches, he says, pointing to a suspiciously large duck circling nearby with murder in its eyes. You make it out unpecked. Barely. You then spend the afternoon repairing a raised walkway that collapsed after being tunneled under by something. Probably a muskrat, your guide says, or a very determined turtle. You dig out the mud, fill it with dried reeds, and stomp it firm. The surface wobbles slightly. You nod. Good enough. And then there are the insects. You thought mosquitoes were bad. Welcome to Chinampa ants. They build colonies between root systems and swarm if disturbed. You find this out the hard way while trying to pull a weed the size of a toddler. 5 seconds later, you're hopping on one leg brushing off ants while 2 passing farmers nod in amusement. One hands you a smear of crushed herbs and clay. You apply it. It works. You smell like a salad. Back on the water, you see a boy throwing fish scraps into a canal bend. You ask why. To feed the lake spirits, he says. And so the snakes eat there, not here. You decide not to paddle too close. Despite the critters, most farmers consider these encounters part of the cycle. You grow food, something tries to eat it, or you find a way to share space. It's not a battle, it's a balancing act. As the sun sets, the lake seems to come alive again. You hear frogs singing, insects chirping, and the occasional splash that you hope is a fish and not a returning reptilian nightmare. You sit on the edge of a chinampa and dip your feet into the water, which feels cooler now, more still. You look out across the fields, lush green and very much alive. Somewhere out there, something scaly probably just ate a bird, and yet the maze still grows. Because here in the floating world of mud and miracle, you don't just farm the land. You farm among the wild. And sometimes the wild bites back. It's early again, fog hanging low, curling like smoke across the still canals. But this time, instead of standing knee-deep in squash, you're sitting cross-legged in a narrow canoe, paddle in hand, gliding through water that mirrors the waking sky. This is the commute of the Chinampa gardener, and honestly, it beats traffic. Your guide today is an old man named Tolan, who hums more than he talks and steers with one hand like the canoe is an extension of his own body. He doesn't explain much. You just follow. The air is cool, smelling faintly of mint and wet stone. As the sun peeks over the edge of the world, the water catches fire and your canoe leaves gentle ripples in its path like a signature on glass. Around you, other boats begin to emerge from the fog, single-person canoes, long cargo barges, bundles of herbs strapped tightly across the bow. A woman passes with pots of chili seedlings. Another follows her boat full of ducks, who seem shockingly chill about the whole thing. One even quacks a low greeting, which you return instinctively. It's early. Historians often marvel at the sheer scale of this aquatic transportation network. The canals of Tenochtitlan weren't just for watering plants. They were highways, bridges, boulevards. No horses, no wheels, just thousands of miles of water routes expertly mapped out in the minds of every gardener and market seller. Tolan takes you deeper into the marsh, turning into side channels you didn't even realize were there. You pass under a canopy of low willows, their branches trailing along the surface like lazy fingers. The canoe brushes against reeds, small fish dart below, and you try not to lose your paddle again. You do. Tolan retrieves it wordlessly. He tells you that every morning gardeners paddle out from the city center or nearby houses to their Chinampa, sometimes for miles. No fences, no locks, just memory. Everyone knows their plot by sight. This tree, this bend, this bird, he says. That's how you know it's yours. You stop at a small landing where several canoes are tied to a makeshift dock. Here, a group of gardeners is unloading baskets of compost. One of them offers you a cup of pinole toasted cornmeal mixed with water and honey. You drink it slowly. It tastes like roasted earth and leftover dreams. Nearby, a boy no older than 10 is ferrying small clay pots in his own canoe, navigating with a reed pole twice his height. He waves proudly, steering around your boat with a flourish. His path is smooth, practiced. He's been doing this longer than you've been walking. Some mornings, Tolan explains, there's canoe traffic, especially on market days. One wrong turn and you'll be stuck behind a sunflower barge for hours. You laugh. He doesn't. It's apparently a very serious inconvenience. You start to notice the subtle etiquette of canal travel. A quick splash means I'm turning. A low whistle is passing on the right. 2 taps on the side of the canoe. That means my duck has escaped. You hear that one more than once. There's even a fringe theory that specialized canal traffic monitors existed, people who knew the flow of canoe commerce and helped coordinate movement during peak hours. No hard evidence for it, but after 5 near collisions, you're starting to hope they invent it soon. You help push off again and continue paddling toward another Chinampa. This one is further out, surrounded by tall grasses and flowering reeds. Tolan slows as a heron steps across the path ahead. No one moves until it finishes, silent deference to the canal gods, or maybe just a universal respect for large, judgmental birds. The canals here are lined with markers, carved poles. Small shrines, bundles of colored feathers that sway gently in the breeze. Navigation is part geography, part spiritual memory. You feel like you're moving through a poem written in mud and water. As you pass another stretch of open canal, Tolan points to a pair of floating baskets trailing behind a canoe. Trash and fish, he says. The baskets are part of a simple but clever system, fish traps in one, collected waste in the other. Every trip becomes multi-purpose. No paddling wasted, no route idle. Back toward the center, the traffic picks up. Canoes now pass every few minutes, each one a floating story. A woman singing to her plants, a man napping beneath a tarp, a boy playing a reed flute while his little sister steers. The lake becomes a symphony of quiet rituals and unspoken roots. You think of your commute back home, horns, lights, asphalt, chaos. Here there's noise too, but it's the noise of water licking wood, of birds overhead, of human voices in conversation with the land. And instead of exhaust fumes, it smells like morning and promise. As the sun climbs, the fog burns away, revealing the full stretch of the Chinampa maze below. From above, it would look like a green puzzle floating on silver. Down here, it's a living current of labor, trade, and memory. You paddle back to your starting point, arms sore, knees stiff, but your mind is calm. You step out onto the shore, the boat rocking gently behind you. Tolan nods, gives your paddle a final once-over, and says simply, "You didn't tip. That's a good start." You smile. You'll take it. You're back on the Chinampa again, this time not with compost or a paddle, but a net and a mission. Today you're joining the crew for pest control, and not the cute kind. This is war, and your enemy is surprisingly feathered. You start your day beside a wide bed of young lettuce, tender and leafy, growing in near-perfect rows. It's the sort of thing you might find on the cover of a seed catalog until you spot the unmistakable sign of trouble. One row ends mid-leaf, chewed to the nub. The culprit, a very smug duck currently floating nearby, clearly waiting for round two. Your first instinct is sympathy. Ducks are adorable, but by the time your guide shows you the damage from yesterday's goose raid, you're ready to declare martial law. You're handed a stick not to hit anything, thank goodness, but to rattle. Your job is to move quietly along the canal edge and tap the water near intruding birds. The goal is to annoy them into leaving without scaring off the herons and egrets, who are the good guys, insect hunters, not lettuce thieves. As you take your position, a few more gardeners join in creating a kind of perimeter. This is not slapstick, it's strategy. You move in sync timing, your splashes coordinating signals. A raised hand means hawk overhead. A circular gesture means squirrel spotted. A clap, otter in the beans again. Yes, otters, cute, sneaky, vegetable-crushing otters. The canals teem with life, and not all of it is welcome. Frogs are fine, fish fantastic. But turtles eat seedlings, ducks flatten bean sprouts, and the occasional iguana, don't ask how it got there, has been caught sunbathing in the squash. You patrol the edge and catch sight of movement. You freeze. A pair of dark feathered coots are waddling toward the amaranth. You rattle the stick. One looks at you with clear disdain. You splash louder. They mutter curses probably and plop back into the water. Historians often overlook this part of Chinampa life, the quiet daily battle between gardener and critter. There are no epic poems about a man defending corn from a feral goose, but there probably should be. These were the invisible wars of the floating empire. You move on to a Chinampa with flower beds, where a new threat appears: insects, and not the polite bee-type bugs. These are aphids, beetles, and worms with ambitions. The gardeners here use all natural solutions, ash, crushed marigold petals, and spicy water mixtures made from chili and garlic. You're told not to touch your eyes after helping. As you help apply a paste to the underside of some squash leaves, a woman tells you about her childhood memories of bug patrol. She'd walk the rows with her grandmother, carefully plucking pests into a gourd that would later be fed to ducks. You think of it as poetic justice, farm to beak. There's even a fringe theory that certain Chinampa sections were planted specifically with sacrificial crops, plants grown purely to lure pests away from the more valuable beds. A patch of tasty lettuce placed in the open, almost like bait. The bugs go there and the real goods are spared. You respect the deception. By late morning the sun is high and the real menace arrives, the birds of midday. Gulls, loud, bossy, aggressive. They dive at bean leaves and fight over tomato stems. One gardener responds by waving a shiny disc tied to a string, primitive but effective. Another sets out a floating scarecrow made of reeds and feathers. It has no face, which makes it more terrifying. You're given a turn with a sling, not to shoot rocks, but to fling small balls of dried mud near the loudest intruders. You whirl it once, twice, release, and hit a tree. The tree was not a target. Your guide pats your shoulder gently. The scarecrow's less expensive, he says. The surprising part, it all feels balanced. No one's out here to wipe out ducks or chase off every creature with wings. The gardeners know this is shared space. The point isn't to dominate nature, it's to negotiate with it. You grow food, nature gets a nibble, but only a nibble. A fringe story floats around that some gardeners named their biggest repeat offenders Old Beak, the Otter Prince, Lady Featherfeet. Some even claimed the animals responded to their names, showing up only when that particular farmer was on duty. You want to believe it. You spend the rest of the afternoon tying up chili plants with braided grass and listening to stories about the great goose ambush of last year, which apparently involved decoy vegetables and a paddle chase. The gardeners laugh until they cry. As the sun begins to lower, the birds quiet. The wind cools, the squash unbends from their midday slouch, and the chinampa sighs. You sit at the edge with your legs dangling into the canal, watching dragonflies flicker across the water. Insects buzz, but politely. A single duck floats by, eyes you, and moves on. A truce for now. You didn't win every battle today. A few beans got pecked, a cucumber vanished, but the field still stands. The flowers still bloom. The chinampa lives on, held together not just by mud and roots, but by vigilance, rattles, and an incredible sense of humor. You lean back, breathing in the scent of marigold and garlic water, and realize this growing food in a floating garden isn't just about plants. It's about keeping the peace. You're up before sunrise again, this time wading through the cool mist, with an armful of woven baskets that smell like dried straw and citrus. Today, the chinampa isn't growing food, it's growing flowers. Your destination is different from the usual rows of squash and maize. This chinampa is vivid, cluttered, and slightly overwhelming, a floating tapestry of blossoms. Everywhere you look, color bursts like confetti. Marigolds burn orange, dahlias erupt in red and pink, and morning glories drape over reed fences like sleepy waterfalls. Your guide today is a woman named Chalchi, a flower grower with an eye like an artist, and the quiet calm of someone who's always 3 steps ahead of the sunrise. She greets you with a handful of fresh-cut marigolds and says, "For the gods first, then for the markets, then maybe for your hair." You don't ask questions, you just tuck the flower behind your ear. As you walk, she explains, while most chinampas focused on crops, some were set aside entirely for floriculture, flower farming. These weren't just decorative, they were essential, used in temples, rituals, ceremonies, funerals, weddings, and festivals. A bloom wasn't just a bloom, it was an offering, a symbol, a message in scent and color. You crouch beside a cluster of white tuberoses, their scent thick and dizzying in the morning air. Chalchi snips a few and gently lays them in your basket, careful not to bruise the petals. Soft hands, she reminds you. Flowers remember how they're picked. Historians note that marigolds, in particular, were sacred in Aztec society, associated with the sun, the afterlife, and Xochitl, the flower goddess. You'll see them again during Day of the Dead traditions centuries later. Same flower, same reverence. The chinampa rows are narrower here, with walkways winding like garden paths. Bees hum lazily from bloom to bloom. Hummingbirds flicker between stalks like lost thoughts, and the occasional frog hops into view before reconsidering and vanishing again into the reeds. Chalchi shows you how to gather blossoms by type. Marigolds are cut close to the stem. Dahlias are pulled with a twist. Some flowers are harvested before they open to bloom later during a ceremony. You try your hand at it, snipping gently. The flower survives. Barely. She smiles and nods like you've passed a test. There's a small shrine tucked in one corner of the chinampa, a stone bowl filled with petals, ash, and water. A flower floats on top. Offerings, she says simply. We don't plant without them. You pause at a section filled with oddly shaped blossoms, some tall and thin, others shaped like cups or tiny torches. Chalchi explains that these are ceremonial flowers chosen not for fragrance or beauty but for meaning. Red ones for blood, white for peace, yellow for the path of the dead. You start to realize this isn't gardening, this is language. There's even a fringe theory that certain Aztec priests used floral arrangements like coded messages, arranging specific flowers in specific patterns to communicate between temples. No physical proof, but the idea is beautiful, like florists with a secret alphabet. As the sun rises higher, you help load flower baskets into a wide canoe, each arrangement wrapped in leaves and bound with corn husk twine. The boat smells better than most perfume shops. Chalchi sets each bundle with care, whispering small blessings under her breath. You ask her if she has a favorite flower. She doesn't hesitate. Xochipatl, a small blue blossom that only grows on the edges of certain chinampas. Hard to find, easy to miss, but it lasts the longest once cut. Like quiet people, she says. They hold on. You glide through the canal toward a market, flowers swaying gently in the breeze. Children wave as you pass. One of them calls out, "Save some for the dead." Chalchi waves back, grinning, "And the living too." The boat docks beside a shaded stall where others have already arrived with armfuls of flowers. You help set up, arranging bouquets into pyramids. The smell is intoxicating. People begin to gather, some buying for altars, others for gifts. One man picks up a single marigold and tucks it into his hat. No words, just meaning. Back on the chinampa later, Chalchi shows you the compost pile, a mound of petals, stems, and broken leaves. Even this smells amazing. We don't waste beauty, she says. We let it grow again. You end your day sitting at the edge of the plot, watching the flowers sway gently with the breeze, their colors dancing in the light. They're more than plants. They're memories grown fresh each morning. You look down and see petals caught in your shoelaces. You don't brush them off. And for a moment the world feels soft, fragrant, and blooming, held together by blossoms, balance, and a quiet reverence for color. The sky today is pale, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and anticipation. You've barely stepped onto the Chinampa when someone points to the sky and mutters, "Too much." Another adds, "Too soon." You look up. The clouds aren't menacing yet, but they're building layered and slow like thoughts gathering before a thunderclap. Today, you're learning about one of the most important and most invisible tasks of the Chinampa world: water management. It seems obvious at first. You're in a lake. Water's everywhere. But as your guide, a thin man with a strong jaw and permanently muddy hands, explains, too much water kills. Too little also kills. We walk the middle. He hands you a long pole with a flattened end. For clearing, he says, and for poking. You start at the edge of a canal where silt has begun to pile up against the roots of a willow. You scoop it aside slowly, careful not to disturb the smaller feeder canals that run through the Chinampa like veins. It's not glamorous, it's essential. Aztec farmers were hydraulic engineers in disguise. They didn't just build floating gardens, they built an entire system of movable, breathable water routes. You pass narrow dikes that divide fresh and brackish water, their reed walls patched weakly. You see sluice gates, simple yet brilliant, carved from wood propped open or closed, depending on the season, the rain, and the whim of the gods. Your guide tells you about a tool they use to monitor water levels. A tall marker stick notched like a measuring cup, anchored at key points. When it reaches the snake mark, he says, pointing to a carved line, we ask the priests to start worrying. There's a soft gurgling behind you. You turn and find a man standing waist-deep in the canal, clearing a clogged junction where two small waterways meet. He's using his hands, scooping muck like a soup chef who got way too ambitious. A turtle watches nearby, unimpressed. Historians still debate the full extent of Aztec aquatic infrastructure. Some claim the entire lake was an intricately managed reservoir. Others argue it was more intuitive, tweaked season by season based on inherited knowledge. Whatever the truth, what you're seeing today is not guesswork. It's maintenance with meaning. You pass a causeway, its base reinforced with layers of stone where someone is propping up one side with bundles of reeds. Another is adding crushed oyster shells to the mix. You ask why. To keep the weeds down, a woman replies. And the gods like the crunch. You nod, of course they do. Then come the flood warnings. It hasn't rained yet, but the tension is rising. A few farmers gather at the central canal junction, inspecting the direction of water flow. You're invited to help open a side gate just a little to ease pressure on one flooded bed. The wood creaks, the current quickens, and just like that, the balance is restored. Until it's not. A young boy runs down the path yelling something urgent. Your guide stiffens. Backed up overflow, he mutters. You all hurry to the far edge of the Chinampa grid, where a once calm channel is now threatening to spill over into a nearby bean field. You form a line, passing rocks and reeds hand to hand. It's muddy, chaotic, and weirdly thrilling. You're building a makeshift dike in real time, sealing gaps with sod clay and hope. The water slows, then stops. A collective sigh ripples through the crew. Your face is covered in flecks of silt and triumph. One gardener explains that in very dry seasons they reverse this process, digging temporary feeder ditches from deeper canals, dragging water by canoe, even invoking Tlaloc, the god of rain, with songs and salt. When it rains too little, he says, we sing. When it rains too much, we pray we sang it right. There's a fringe theory that the Aztec calendar wasn't just ceremonial. It doubled as a seasonal water guide, marking the best days for draining, dredging, and planting to avoid rot. You're told to take it with a grain of obsidian, but still, it fits. By late afternoon, the sky shifts again. The clouds roll back like a retreating tide. A breeze stirs the canal. Ducks reappear. The tension lifts. You rinse your hands in the channel and realize your fingernails may never be clean again. But your chinampa, it's breathing easy. You help install a few more flow marker sticks painted with bright bands and feathers placed at intervals to track water rise overnight. So the field speaks even while we sleep, someone says, and when you finally sit down at the water's edge, you feel something you didn't expect: respect, not just for the cleverness of the system, but for its fragility. This wasn't a machine. It was a conversation between land, lake, and labor, and every canal told a story. You watch as the light fades over the water, catching on ripples like ink strokes on a silver page. Someone starts to sing. The same slow song you've heard before, low and steady like water trickling over stone. And you realize here in the floating gardens of balance, water isn't controlled. It's invited. You're standing beside a steaming mound of something. It's lumpy. It's dark, it's humming with heat, and it smells exactly like what it is: compost, Aztec style. Your guide today is a round-faced man with hands like tree bark and a contagious laugh that bounces off the water like pebbles. He pats the heap proudly. This, he says, is what makes the maize grow tall and the chilies scream. You're about to spend the next few hours learning the secrets of one of the least glamorous but most sacred parts of chinampa farming, turning rot into gold. You begin by digging into the pile with a wide wooden paddle. Steam rises thick and earthy. Inside, the contents reveal themselves layer by layer: rotted maize husks, crushed reeds, leftover squash stems, fish bones, feathers, and the unmistakable presence of lake slime, the green glue your guide calls it. Aztec compost wasn't a random dump zone. It was a carefully curated ecosystem in its own right. Gardeners layered plant scraps with lake mud ash from cooking fires, waterlogged leaves, and the occasional helping of lime or crushed shell to balance acidity. The result: a slow simmering stew of fertility. You help stir it with long sweeping motions, folding outer crust into the center like kneading a very judgmental sourdough. Your arms start to burn by the third rotation. Your guide cheers. Now you smell like the lake. You belong. You ask how they know when it's ready. He sniffs. When it stops smelling like a party and starts smelling like breakfast. He's not wrong. There's something oddly warm and comforting in the scent, like baked earth and boiled tea leaves with just a hint of overripe onion. Some historians argue that Aztec composting was the most efficient in the ancient world, rivaling even the famed systems of Asia. Others debate the scale. Was every family pile self-managed, or did some communities run centralized compost stations? The answer seems to be both. In Chinampa culture, everything loops. There's even a fringe theory that ritual ashes from temple fires or ceremonial burnings were occasionally added to elite garden plots, infusing them with spirit warmth. You mention this. Your guide shrugs. Wouldn't surprise me. My uncle used to add bone dust and say the plants grew stronger because they were haunted. He grins. After the pile's stirred, you help distribute the compost across a new planting bed. A small canoe is loaded with woven trays of the rich material, each smelling like ancient ambition. You paddle slowly along the edge of the Chinampa, handing trays to gardeners who scatter it evenly, with flat circular gestures like smoothing icing across the skin of the earth. It's quiet work, meditative, One woman sings softly as she works. Another hums in rhythm with her rake. You lose track of time as the compost disappears into the soil, absorbed, as if the land has been waiting for it. You're invited to visit a compost nursery, a plot reserved for particularly tricky crops that need extra rich soil. The growth here is outrageous. Squash leaves the size of cloaks, beans coiling skyward like they're racing the sun. The gardener swears by her method, more rot, more glory. In the far corner, a small shrine has been built, barely more than a stack of stones and flowers, but reverent all the same. You ask who it's for. The things we don't eat, someone answers. But who feed us anyway? You don't ask for clarification. You understand. Even the water plays a role. Ditches and canals near compost heaps are used to flush out excess leachate liquid runoff that's either diluted and reused or fed to certain beds that thrive on its weird funkiness. You help pour a bucket of the dark brew near a row of chili plants. Be careful, someone warns. Last time we overfed them, they came out angry. You spend the rest of the afternoon helping build a new compost frame, just 4 posts, and a weave of reeds to keep everything contained. As you work, a boy skips past with a basket of fish heads and shouts for the pile his mother tosses in a bowl of crushed avocado skins. A nearby cook brings corn cobs. No one wastes a thing. This isn't just a dump zone, it's a communal engine. The compost isn't dirty, it's sacred. Everyone contributes, everyone benefits. You're told that even the royal kitchen sent scraps to the Chinampas. The emperor's bones grow our maize, someone jokes. And when the pile finally settles and the last layer is laid, a small handful of marigold petals is scattered across the top. A blessing, a promise, a bloom for the rot. As the sun begins to dip behind the willows, you sit beside the heap, not minding the smell anymore. It's become natural, familiar, comforting. You realize something profound and slightly squishy. In the world of the Chinampas, nothing is wasted. Not labor, not water, not even death. Everything becomes something else. Everything returns. You dig your fingers into the soil near the edge of the compost bed. It's warm, alive, and waiting. You're walking through a Chinampa garden so lush, so rich in color, it looks like someone spilled a basket of spices across the earth. Reds, oranges, deep greens, and glints of purple burst from every corner. It's not just a feast for the eyes, it's a literal feast waiting to happen. Today, you're on a guided tour of the most flavorful part of Aztec agriculture, the forbidden fruits, sacred vegetables, and empire-famous flavor bombs that once fed rulers and peasants alike. First, stop the tomatoes, or rather tomato round-ribbed, and far more intense than their modern cousins. You pluck one from the vine, rub it clean against your shirt, and bite. Instantly your mouth floods with a punch of tangy sweetness and sun. It's so fresh it practically vibrates. Your guide, an energetic woman named Citlali, laughs at your expression. Too much, she teases. You shake your head. Too perfect, maybe. Tomatoes weren't the only stars of the Aztec palate. You crouch beside a bed of chili peppers, their pointed bodies glossy and angry-looking. One variety is bright yellow and curved like a hook. Another is deep red, shriveled and practically vibrating with spite. Citlali warns you, don't touch your eyes. Don't breathe near the dried ones. And if you eat one, make peace with your gods first. You take her word for it. Nearby beans spiral up corn stalks like acrobats. Squash vines creep underfoot, their round bodies tucked like secrets beneath wide velvety leaves. And in between herbs, epazote hoja santa, and cilantro's distant wilder cousin, grow in fuzzy, fragrant patches. This wasn't just farming, it was culinary alchemy. Historians agree that Aztec cuisine was incredibly sophisticated, layering textures, flavors, and heat in ways that rival anything you'd find in a fine dining menu today. The Chinampas weren't just feeding stomachs. They were creating art in every clay pot. You're invited to help harvest a small batch of herbs and chilies, bound for the local market kitchen where food is prepared for communal meals and visiting dignitaries. As you gather handfuls of pungent green stems, Citlali tells you how the empire tracked certain ingredients with near religious devotion. Chili was for warriors, she says, maize for everyone, tomatoes for sweetness, and chocolate. Ah yes, cacao. You follow her to a smaller section of the Chinampa, where young cacao trees are growing under partial shade. They're not native to the highlands, they require more heat and humidity, but here in this pampered plot, they're trying. You reach out and touch one of the large leaves. Smooth, slightly waxy, mysterious. You don't eat the bean raw, Citlali explains. It's bitter, sacred, dangerous if disrespected. You believe her immediately. Chocolate or chocolatl was not a snack. It was an elite drink served frothy, spicy, unsweetened, and often blended with chili or flowers. Reserved for warriors, nobles, and priests. You could literally pay your taxes in cacao beans. You hold one in your palm. It's dry, small brown, and worth more than some gold in its day. There's a fringe theory, Citlali's favorite, that some Chinampa farmers tried to crossbreed cacao with native plants to make it easier to grow in cooler zones. She shrugs. It didn't work, but we still try. You glance around. There are saplings everywhere. Next on your flavor tour, avocados. Rich, dense, and growing on trees that lean like lazy old men. You pick one and slice it open with a bone-handled blade. Inside is the greenest green you've ever seen. A nearby boy hands you a piece of flat maize bread, and without ceremony you scoop and eat. No salt, no extras, just earth fat and sunshine. You almost cry. Citlali pretends not to notice. And there, nestled between two squash mounds, you find the showstopper, a tiny patch of vanilla orchids, spindly vines with shy flowers. They're fragile, she says. We don't harvest often. They're like dreams, better remembered than chased. You nod, stunned by how casually she delivers poetry while picking chilies. As you continue, someone hands you a drink. It's a toll thick with toasted maize touched with cinnamon and honey. You sip. The warmth slides into your bones. This isn't just a beverage, it's ancestral medicine. And here's the kicker. Most of this wasn't grown for one meal or even one household. These Chinampas supported entire communities, feeding thousands, while also producing export goods for tribute and trade. There's a spirited debate nearby, two older farmers arguing over whether chilies or chocolate were more valuable. One points out that chocolate was sacred. The other counters that no god ever wept over a good chili. You side with neither. You're too busy trying to breathe after accidentally licking your fingers. As the sun begins to dip, the harvest is complete. Baskets overflow with colors and aromas. The air is thick with the scent of crushed herbs and cooked corn. Someone is roasting squash seeds. Someone else is making tortillas over hot stone. You sit at the edge of the field legs, dangling, watching as food becomes culture, becomes ceremony, becomes memory. This isn't a garden. It's a kitchen. And the whole empire is hungry. The first thing you notice this morning isn't the dew on the squash leaves or the dragonflies tracing lazy circles over the water. It's the sound, a chorus of small voices laughing, splashing, and occasionally shouting things like, That's not a fish, that's a rock, and you planted that upside down. Today, you're joining the youngest crew in Chinampa country. It's training day, and the students are children. You're guided by a middle-aged teacher named Nahua, whose calm energy somehow keeps a dozen wiggly kids from accidentally planting each other. She hands you a small, battered reed basket and a knowing smile. Try to keep up, she says. The kids are already hard at work. 2 are knee-deep in a shallow canal scooping water with gourds into irrigation trenches. Another 3 are clearing weeds with tiny wooden hoes. One girl is crouched beside a young beanstalk, whispering to it. You ask what she's saying. She replies, I told it to grow fast because I don't like waiting. You're instantly outclassed. Nahua explains that Chinampa knowledge isn't something taught in a classroom. It's absorbed through touch repetition and muddy knees. These kids learn by doing. Every task, from turning compost to reading water flow, becomes a game, a lesson, a rhythm. Your first job is to help a group of boys test soil texture by poking it with fingers and sniffing it. One proudly tells you, this one smells like fish, so it's ready. You nod like a seasoned expert. It does smell like fish. It's unclear whether that's good. Historians believe that Aztec children began participating in farm labor early, not as laborers but as apprentices. Tasks were scaled to size smaller buckets, shorter tools, gentler rows, and no, they didn't get days off. The floating farm was both a playground and a training ground. You join another group carefully placing maize seeds into a grid. The kids sing a planting song in Nahuatl, high-pitched and sweet about the sun, the rain, and a sleepy mole that needs to be quiet while they work. One boy sings louder than the rest, clearly making up new lyrics. No one stops him. There's even a mud class. You watch as a group mixes canal silt with crushed reeds, ash, and crushed eggshells into a gray slop. The kids shape the muck into balls, then press it flat with their palms. Nahua tests the result with a stick. Too wet, she says. You're feeding the fish, not the beans. One girl adds more ash. Another fans the surface with a reed mat. 10 minutes later, the teacher nods. That's soil that listens. You're handed a quiz. It's not on paper. It's a basket of unlabeled plants. The challenge: identify which ones are for medicine, which are for spice, and which are just nice-smelling weeds. The children get 10 out of 10. You get 3. They clap politely for your effort. You learn that some Chinampas are maintained almost entirely by family units, with children doing morning rounds before classes or temple visits. Others have formal instruction sessions like this, especially for orphans, novices, or the children of specialist guilds. A fringe theory suggests that some children's planting songs doubled as mnemonics, memory aids passed down across generations. The melody might vary, but the pattern of planting, spacing, and harvest stayed constant. You hum along, hoping to remember the tune. Later in the day, a boy calls out, "It's floating." You rush over to see a small raft woven by the children themselves, carrying baby amaranth sprouts across a narrow canal. They cheer. Nahua calls it a success in microagriculture. You call it adorable. Then comes snack time. Everyone sits beneath a willow munching on corn patties with a smear of bean paste and dried fruit. One kid offers you his. You politely decline. He insists. You try it. It's delicious and a little crunchy. You decide not to ask what the crunch was. Afterward, the children gather in a circle for a story. Nahua tells them about the first Chinampa, how it was built by a lonely farmer who wanted to grow food for the gods, and how the lake gave him reeds, mud, and ducks who were not helpful. The kids laugh. One of them says he wants to build a chinampa shaped like a jaguar. Another wants to plant only chocolate. The third just wants to make one big enough to nap on. You silently vote for the nap. As the sun climbs, the lesson ends. Tools are rinsed. Hands are wiped. The children wave goodbye and pile into a large canoe that looks like it's held together by prayer and a bit of glue. They vanish down the canal, still singing. You stay behind, watching their muddy footprints dry in the sun. The chinampa is quiet again, but the rows of tiny plants now hold something new, the future. These kids aren't just learning how to garden, they're learning how to inherit the lake. And you've learned something too. That the floating fields of Tenochtitlan weren't just born from ingenuity. They were passed on generation by generation in muddy fingers and whispered songs. You arrive just as a drumbeat echoes faintly across the water, not fast, not festive. This is a slow, heavy rhythm measured like a heartbeat under stone. Something's different today. The chinampa is quieter. No market bustle, no kids chasing frogs, just farmers standing a little straighter, tools tucked away, faces marked with ash or ochre. You've entered a day of ceremony. Your guide, a tall, quiet man named Teoquicotl, explains today some farmers won't plant, some won't harvest. Today the chinampa becomes a place of preparation. He points to a field of marigolds glowing like fire in the early light. These, he says, are not for the market. They're for the dead. You follow him through the rows. Men and women are cutting marigold heads, carefully placing them in woven trays lined with white cotton. The flowers are for a funeral. A respected elder farmer passed 2 nights ago, and her burial rites include offerings from the very soil she worked. Not all chinampas are active farms today. A few are left untouched, their gates close, the water around them marked with floating petals or candles. These are ceremonial plots, spaces used for ritual mourning and sometimes even celebration. You hadn't realized how deeply chinampa life extended into spiritual terrain. Teoquicotl tells you how farmers would often pause their work for ceremonies, whether it was for planting season prayers, funerals, or major empire events. We live by the sun, he says, but we stop for the ancestors. You help carry a tray of marigolds to a waiting canoe where they're arranged between bundles of copal incense and small clay bowls of maize. The boat will float to a temple farther into the city, part of a slow-moving procession guided by paddle and prayer. You're invited to witness another ceremony, this one right here on the chinampa. It's for a young man being called to join the empire's army. His family offers squash beans and maize from their own fields, laid out carefully on a mat at the edge of the plot. A priest blesses the offering with water, then pours it back into the canal. We give, he says, we take, we return. Historians note how often chinampas were woven into ritual cycles. Crops weren't just food, they were symbols of sacrifice, continuity, and cosmic duty. Some chinampas were even temporarily converted into altars, especially during seasonal festivals like Huitzilopochtli, honoring the maize gods. There's a fringe theory that certain planting beds were shaped to mimic sacred symbols, snakes, suns, or even footprints of the gods. Satellite imagery hasn't proven it, but when you stand at the edge of the field and squint, you can almost see the pattern. Later in the morning, a group of young men arrives carrying baskets, not of produce but of obsidian blades and ceremonial cloaks. They're here for another rite to bless their tools before returning to war. It's jarring, this contrast, mud-streaked farmers and armed warriors, all kneeling beside the same tomato rows. One man cuts a small slit in his thumb and presses it to a corn stalk. A drop of blood, a silent vow, the field accepts it. The wind rustles once, then settles. You ask Teocuicatl if chinampas were ever used during battles. He nods. Sometimes, he says. Fields are abandoned. Sometimes they hide people. Sometimes they hide weapons. You imagine it, lush gardens masking the chaos beneath. A war disguised in green. There's even a tale he shares, half myth, half memory, about a warrior who returned from battle only to find his family's chinampa overtaken by weeds and silence. He cleared it with his bare hands and replanted it that night. He said if the maize didn't return, neither would he. You don't know if it's true, but standing here with ceremony in the air and maize swaying beside bundles of incense, it feels true. In the afternoon, a group of women sits at the far edge of the chinampa, weaving garlands of flowers and corn husk. These will be floated down the canals at dusk, gifts to the spirits, thanks to the gods, and reminders that even the smallest offerings carry weight. You join in, clumsily braiding a ring of flowers. Yours looks like a confused salad. One woman laughs and fixes it for you. She ties a piece of red thread around your wrist and says softly, for safe return, even if you're not going far. As the sun begins to fall, the water reflects the petals floating on its surface. You ride in the last canoe of the day, trailing the quiet procession. The city glows ahead, but the chinampa behind still holds the songs, the footsteps and the hushed prayers of the day. No crops were picked, no soil was turned, and yet the field is full. Because today the chinampa wasn't a farm, it was a temple, your ankle deep in cracked earth. The canal that usually ripples with fish and carries songs across the chinampas has receded to a silent trickle. The water smells like memory, and the soil, it crumbles under your touch like dry paper. It's dry season, or worse, a year when the rains just never came. Your guide today is a stooped old woman named Itzel. She's all elbows and wisdom, and she doesn't sugarcoat anything. This is when you know if your chinampa loves you, she says, jabbing a stick into the ground, or if it lets you starve. You follow her across what used to be a lush green stretch of beans and chilies. Now it's brown and exhausted. A few stubborn plants cling to life, sunflowers with bowed heads, maize stalks whispering their last prayers. You ask how often this happens. Not often, she replies, but often enough to keep us humble. The Aztecs didn't just build for abundance, they built for survival. And in years like this, the chinampas became a battlefield against thirst. You join a crew dredging one of the deeper canals, trying to clear silt that's clogging the flow. It's back-breaking work. The mud at the bottom is more clay than water now. Every scoop weighs like guilt. A boy slips and lands with a splash that barely moves. He laughs. No one else does. Farmers from neighboring plots arrive. There's no competition today, only cooperation. Tools are shared, buckets passed down the line. You hear no arguing, only the scrape of shovels and the occasional grunt of effort. It's quiet, determined. Itzel pulls you aside and shows you a backup plot, a smaller chinampa hidden in a shaded area, surrounded by thicker vegetation. It's slightly damp. It's also half-harvested already. Emergency food, she says. We rotate it. Pray we don't touch it. But this season they did. And now it's nearly bare. Historians still debate whether the Aztecs had formal drought management plans or whether local knowledge and community ties were the true safety net. From what you're seeing, it's the latter. There's no imperial water truck rolling through here, just neighbors with buckets and patience. You help haul water from one of the deeper wells, a spring-fed canal that hasn't dried completely. Itzel hands you a gourd filled with warm, slightly brackish water. "We drink too," she says, "only after the maize gets its share." It's hard not to feel the desperation in the air. Leaves are brittle, roots are shallow, and yet there's still action, not panic, adaptation. Some plots have shifted to drought-resistant crops, amaranth cactus, certain herbs. Others are empty, their beds covered in woven mats to preserve what moisture remains. One man paints a small sign on a stick and presses it into his dry field. It reads simply, "Still breathing." You hear talk of a ceremony planned for tonight, offerings for Tlaloc, the rain god. Not because they think it'll fix everything immediately, but because it reminds them they are not alone in the waiting. A fringe theory suggests that certain Aztec canal systems were built with drought in mind, angled in ways that could trap morning dew or shaped to direct even the smallest rainfall toward collection basins. You don't know if it's true, but you do see one boy placing clay bowls in shaded corners, hoping for drips. Later, a few gardeners walk the fields with bundles of smoldering herbs, waving them in slow spirals over the soil. Not magic, Itzel says, just tradition, and maybe a little guilt. She shows you how to pulse water, the art of watering in slow bursts. A little here, a little there. Let it soak, wait, then return. It's not efficient, it's reverent. In the afternoon, the sky teases you. Clouds gather, just a few. Enough to get your hopes up. Enough to make the wind shift. But then, nothing. Just heat. Still no one stops. A teenage girl leads a group laying fresh reeds along the canal walls to prevent further evaporation. An elder sprinkles a mix of ash and crushed limestone into a dying bed of herbs, an old trick for trapping moisture. A boy prays out loud to a half-dead bean plant. It doesn't answer, but it stays upright. You notice that no one here curses the sky. No one begs. They just work. The kind of work that says, if the rain doesn't come, we'll still be here, and if it does, we'll be ready. As the sun lowers, casting long shadows across the cracked fields, a breeze picks up. The reeds sway. A single drop hits your arm, then another. You look up. 3 drops, maybe 4, then it stops. Itzel smiles. "He's thinking about it," she says. You believe her. You sit at the edge of the chinampa and stare at the sky, heart heavy but strangely full. These people do not wait passively. They resist the drought with every breath, every scoop of water, every half-whispered planting song. And maybe, just maybe, that's how they summon the rain. You don't hear the invaders at first. What you hear is a woman early in the morning humming as she ties up a wilting squash vine with braided grass. You hear a paddle cutting gently through the water, a boy scooping handfuls of mud into a planting bed. The chinampa breathes on quietly, as it always has. But today the breath shortens. There's a buzz in the air, not insects, not gossip, a shift, a sense of something watching. Then the sounds begin, metal clanking, foreign shouting, the occasional crack of something splitting wood, or maybe something softer. The Spanish have arrived. Your guide today is Icnoyotl, older than most, with a slight limp and a voice like sandpaper. He doesn't rush, just gestures for you to follow. They don't understand this place, he says, so they'll try to break it. You paddle with him into the heart of the chinampa grid, and immediately the damage is visible. A canoe has been overturned, its contents herbs, chilies, a woven basket of tomatoes floating in a sad swirl. A few fields are trampled, not intentionally, just clumsily. They tried to walk on it, Ichnoyotl says, shaking his head. Didn't realize it floats. You'd laugh if the air weren't so tense. When the Spanish conquistadors entered Tenochtitlan in 1519, they were struck dumb by its beauty and baffled by its engineering. A floating city, a water-bound farm system. It defied their sense of what was civilized, so they labeled it sorcery. And then, of course, they tried to conquer it. The Chenampas weren't built for war, but they became part of one. You float past reed barriers hastily reconstructed after being smashed. You see plots burned at the edges, not scorched earth tactics, but confused destruction. The invaders didn't know what to make of the system, so they broke it piece by piece. Ichnoyotl shows you a hidden plot where some families are still trying to plant. The crops are sparse, the water is muddied, but the act of planting continues. This, he says, is how we resist. We grow, even when they trample. You pass a canal where one of the Spanish soldiers, according to a nearby farmer, fell in and screamed, convinced he was being pulled under by spirits. It was a fish, the farmer says, but we didn't correct him. You almost smile. Historians agree that the Spanish were both awed and overwhelmed by the scale and sophistication of the Chenampa system. Some records show them describing the city as more dazzling than any in Spain, but within months they began reshaping it, draining canals, dismantling the network, replacing water with stone. There's even a fringe theory that a few Spanish commanders secretly tried to preserve Chenampa knowledge, seeing its value. But the larger momentum was clear. Conquest meant concrete, and the floating gardens didn't fit the blueprint. You help one farmer shore up a canal wall where part of it has collapsed, possibly trampled by horses in a lake. The absurdity would be funny if it weren't so sad. Nearby, a group of children is gathering duckweed not to feed crops, but to feed ducks, because their usual maize rations have been confiscated. A woman offers you a piece of stale tortilla. It's the first real food they've had in days. You don't take it. In one Chenampa, someone has carved words into a drying canal post, "The water remembers." Ichnoyotl tells you stories of farmers who hid seeds in their homes, who buried tools to keep them from being melted down, who whispered planting songs to each other like secret codes. They can't conquer the soil, he says. They don't know how to listen to it. You believe him. You hear that disease came next. Smallpox, measles, fevers that swept across the Chenampas faster than even the strongest flood. Some plots are abandoned now. Others show signs of strange burnings meant to cleanse maybe or to destroy. And yet, you see a boy still planting. You see an old woman stirring compost. You see a canoe loaded with herbs headed toward a corner of the market still functioning. And as dusk falls over the lake, the Chenampas shimmer, not bright but steady, like a heartbeat still beating after a blow. The Spanish may not understand these floating farms, but they've stepped into something older than steel and greed. A lake, a garden, a memory that knows how to bloom in silence. You sit with Ichnoyotl under a willow as the sky turns violet. He dips his fingers into the canal, holds up a handful of water, and lets it fall back through his fingers. They can drain the lake, he says, but they can't take the roots. The lake is quieter now. Not silent, never silent, but hushed, as though it's caught in a long, slow breath it doesn't know how to release. You paddle gently with a new guide, a soft-spoken man named Matlal. His hands are calloused, but he speaks like a poet, who's forgotten more than most people ever learn. This, he says, is what survival looks like. You glide through a patchwork of chinampas that have clearly seen better days. Some are half collapsed. Others are flooded, their crops drowned under an inch of standing water. The canals between them are narrower, choked with reeds and debris. Still you see people. A man patches a wall with bundled reeds. A girl plants tiny bean seeds into a row of stubborn mud. A grandmother ladles water into a clay bowl with practiced hands. This isn't the heyday. It's not even the afterglow. It's the slow pulse of persistence. Matlal explains after the conquest, as Spanish colonists began draining Lake Texcoco to make way for stone buildings and grid streets, the Chinampas were pushed further and further to the margins geographically and politically. Water control replaced water harmony, concrete replaced canals, and slowly the city stopped floating. But the Chinampa farmers didn't stop. Not completely. Some plots stayed alive, Matlal says. Others went to sleep. You visit one of those sleeping plots, abandoned for decades, but now halfway revived. A young couple has started rebuilding the reed walls, dredging out the muck, replanting maize. They tell you their grandparents left this Chinampa during the worst of the floods. Now they're back. They call it the reawakening. You ask how many Chinampas still function. Matlal shrugs. Enough to feed hope. There's even a fringe theory that some of the surviving plots hidden behind modern construction or wedged between highways still grow heirloom varieties of vegetables long thought extinct. You see one gardener pulling up an enormous amaranth stalk and placing it gently into a canoe. It looks prehistoric, sacred. Some Chinampas have adapted growing ornamental plants or herbs for restaurants. Others survive as family gardens passed down like whispered lullabies. You pass one where every row is labeled by hand in Nahuatl. The pride is silent but shining. Still the city presses in. High-rises loom beyond the reeds. The rumble of distant traffic bleeds faintly into the air. Overhead, a plane streaks across the sky, far above the world of mud and maize. You reach a community garden built atop an old Chinampa bed. Volunteers, some young, some not, weed harvest water with hoses tied to plastic tanks. It's not pure, it's not traditional, but it breathes. You help one young man harvest cilantro, and he tells you how he learned about Chinampas from TikTok. I thought they were just legend, he says, shaking dirt from the roots. Then I came here, and it was real. Later, you attend a small gathering by the water's edge. A teacher is leading a group of school children through a lesson about ancient farming. She holds up a maize cob and says, "This fed empires." One kid asks, "Why don't we do this everywhere?" No one answers, not directly, but they all look at the water. Matlal leans in and says, "We forgot to listen to the land, but it's still speaking." As night falls, lanterns light the path between Chinampas. Some are LED, others are clay bowls with wicks. All of them flicker against the dark like fireflies reclaiming the story. You sit with Matlal beside a restored canal. He hands you a gourd filled with atole. To warm the memory, he says. You sip. It tastes like everything you've seen: mud bloom, grief, stubbornness, and a sweetness you can't name. He points across the water. That one's mine, my father's, his father's. We never left it, and it never left us. You ask if he thinks the Chinampas will return in full. He smiles. They never left. We did. But we're paddling back. You sit in silence for a long time, watching the water mirror the stars. And somewhere between the ripples you feel it. The lake is not gone. It is waiting. The morning feels like an exhale. Mist hangs low over the canals, not like a threat or a veil, but like a blanket pulled halfway up, a gesture of comfort. You're back where you started, on a narrow reed-edged chinampa, listening to the water, but this time you understand what it's saying. You walk alone now, past squash leaves larger than your face, past maize stalks proud and golden in the morning light, past empty planting beds covered in woven mats resting like tired shoulders between harvests. Every step you take feels familiar, because you've walked this path before, in someone else's shoes, in centuries-old mud. Your fingers brush the soft heads of amaranth. Your toes sink into lake-fed earth. You breathe in the smell of compost and rain-soaked wood, and for the first time it doesn't feel foreign. It feels like you've come home. A canoe glides past, barely making a ripple. Two young gardeners wave. Their boat is filled with chilies and herbs, wrapped in banana leaves. You nod back instinctively. No need to explain who you are. You belong here now, mud on your shoes, calluses earned quiet in your breath. In the distance, someone sings. You pause beside a patch of wildflowers, some for the gods, some for color, some just for joy. A single marigold nods in the breeze beside your leg. You kneel, not to pick it, just to be with it. The chinampa breathes. You remember the first one you helped build, the layers of reeds and mud, the mess, the laughter. You remember the dead fish, the living roots, the lesson that rot feeds growth. You remember the children singing to maize, the compost that smelled like memory, the birds that bargained with your tomatoes. You remember the water's whisper and the stories written not in stone, but in soil. You remember that even after conquest, after drought, after neglect and confusion and time itself, the chinampa still stand. Because what they grow isn't just food, it's connection, it's balance, it's resilience disguised as agriculture. And now at the end, or maybe the beginning, you realize the most lurid truth of all. The chinampa is a mirror. Whatever you bring to it, it reflects. If you arrive rushed, it slows you down. If you arrive hardened, it softens you. If you arrive hungry, it feeds more than just your belly. You dip your fingers into the canal one last time. The water is cool, familiar. It curls around your skin like a welcome, or a farewell, or both. You close your eyes. The lake is still speaking, and now you're listening. So now that your journey through the floating gardens is complete, let's slow things down just a little more. Imagine yourself back on the water, gently drifting past rows of resting fields. The sun is soft now, low on the horizon, casting everything in gold. The air smells like wet leaves, stone, and a little smoke from the evening cook fires. You're tired, but the good kind of tired, the kind that comes from work that mattered. The chinampa slips behind you slowly, reed by reed, and all the noise of the world traffic screens, lists voices, fades to a single ripple on still water. Even the birds seem to sing more slowly now. Even the insects hush. You can feel the boat rocking gently beneath you. Not too much, just enough to lull. Your eyes grow heavier with each breath. Your thoughts come slower now, more like drifting feathers than worries. You remember the smell of fresh-cut maize, the sight of marigolds in a misty morning, the laugh of a child watering squash with a gourd the size of her head. You remember the silence of the soil, and the way it always had something to say. The story of the chinampas isn't gone. It's not trapped in books or ruins. It's out there, still floating, still growing. And maybe if you listen just right, you'll hear the lake again, speaking softly, asking gently, what will you grow next? Good night. End of script. Sweet dreams.